for joining us for a special episode of Crossroads Politics here on WTHR+. I'm Emily Longnecker.
And I'm Dustin Grove. We start with a big move by the Trump administration this week, changing how we treat medical marijuana at the federal level. For decades, this has been a Schedule I drug, no different really than heroin or LSD. But it's now being moved to a Schedule III drug, like the Tylenol with codeine you might be prescribed after getting a tooth pulled.
Again, this is at the federal level. As Ella Rhodes explains, it doesn't change much here in Indiana yet.
It doesn't impact us in Indiana here just yet, but the reclassification of medical marijuana coming down from the federal government shows the state legislature a strong message of where the president stands on this subject. It also opens the conversation down the line if the state legislature wants to consider legalizing medical marijuana. Indiana is a few steps closer to the possibility of legal medical marijuana. Veteran Jeff Staker spent the last 10 years fighting for it.
I was prescribed oxycodone through the VA for nearly 10 years, and I was running the risk of accidentally overdosing. A lot of veterans that are within the pain management clinic are taking some sort of narcotic, and they would like to, have this choice of taking a plant-based medicine.
The federal government's decision to reclassify the drug from Schedule I, a high abuse, no medical benefit category with drugs like heroin, to Schedule III, with prescription Tylenol medicine, helps his argument.
Now, there's only 10 more states that are remaining for medical, and Indiana is one of them. And I'm hoping that the governor will give us a chance to get in his office and have this discussion with him.
The Indiana Pharmacy Association clarified the order makes no immediate change in the state.
Or what's new is that state licensed medical marijuana was never scheduled or permitted under federal law. And so what this essentially does is permits those that prescribe or dispense medical marijuana in states that license that activity to get a registration with the federal government to do those activities.
Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears believes the reclassification is long overdue.
Let's get this on the pathway to legalization so we're not criminalizing people like veterans and elderly people who are just looking for a solution to some of their health care issues.
In his line of work, he sees people regularly who benefit from medical marijuana.
But we don't think that the role of the criminal justice system is to be involved in simple possession of marijuana. And so, we certainly feel that there's a number of equity reasons in terms of why it's not necessary to prosecute simple possession of marijuana.
Now it comes down to the state to decide what's next. We reached out to the Indiana Attorney General's office, Todd Rokita. They say they're still evaluating this order. We also reached out to the governor's office, but we have yet to hear back. Now, as for Jeff Staker and his group Hoosier Veterans for Medical Cannabis, they plan to meet with state leaders to discuss the future of medical marijuana in the state. In Indianapolis, Ella Rhodes, 13 News.
Ella, thank you. Emily, there has been a push for a long time to get something done on medical marijuana at the state level. I can remember interviewing Senator Karen Tallian more than 10 years ago.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to get much movement.
Yeah, every session advocates try to introduce several bills, get them introduced, normally from lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. These bills come down, and every year they don't even get a committee hearing most times.
And the issue actually has some prominent supporters, right?
Yeah, it sure does. Republican State Representative Jim Lucas comes to mind. He's a member of the Financial Institutions, Public Policy, and Veterans Affairs committees. He's been an outspoken advocate for cannabis legalization for years.
Okay, and you mentioned the Veterans Affairs Committee. The Veterans Committee are some of the biggest advocates for legalization.
Yeah,
here.
they sure are. The American Legion supported the reclassification effort, and the group Ella talked to, Hoosier Veterans for Medical Cannabis, are often seen at the State House. I've met with them too, telling lawmakers how the drug helps them deal with PTSD.
And I know former Governor Eric Holcomb was asked about this a lot as well. He would often point to the federal law when explaining why he wouldn't explore medical marijuana in Indiana. Governor Braun seems to be a little more open to the idea, doesn't he?
For sure. But he hasn't given a definite commitment one way or the other. At one point, he told me with every neighboring state having it, at some point you have to deal with it, is what he said. And I reached out to his team on Thursday to ask whether the change at the federal level would have any bearing on the governor's decision on this for Indiana, but I didn't hear back.
And you can bet lawmakers will hear a whole lot about it
Absolutely.
next session in January. All right, now to the growing debate over data centers. Across the country and right here at home, data centers are expanding fast, but so is the opposition.
As we've shown you over the past year, there's growing backlash from communities across the country worried about energy use, water, and quality of life. Some are actually banning new data centers from being built. So could we see that here in Indiana?
Well, I learned in some local communities here in Indiana, it's already happened.
As you can hear, a lot of voices opposing this project.
From downtown Indianapolis to the suburbs and beyond,
We're from completely different walks of life, but we walk hand in hand.
neighbors and communities are fighting to push the pause button on data centers.
What we're not going to do is roll over and let them do whatever they would like to our community.
Supporters say data centers bring jobs, tax revenue, and are critical to powering the digital economy.
When you think about the future of development and investment in data centers, can create a great future for the people of Indianapolis.
But critics, concerned about the massive resources these data centers require, including electricity and water, they're worried the cost could fall on them through higher utility bills and strained infrastructure.
This issue is going to impact my kids and the kids they have and the kids they have. And these data centers are going to be living for a lot longer than I will or you will.
So far, at least 4 Indiana counties have enacted or considered moratoriums on new projects to further study their impact. And in the last year, more than 100 communities across the country have also started hitting the brakes. In a first-of-its-kind move, Maine passed a temporary statewide pause on large data centers, and earlier this year the debate even reached Congress.
I will soon be introducing legislation calling for a moratorium on the construction of new data centers.
So what about here?
Should Indiana slow down the incentivizing of data centers until this kind of thing can be studied further?
I mean, most of the incentivizing has been done at the local area.
Governor Mike Braun not calling for a moratorium, but is supporting oversight.
You got to be careful. It cannot impact in any way the cost of electricity to Hoosier families or businesses. It will be a big economic benefit if the local areas want them.
And Emily, it's important to point out that even though lawmakers passed that moratorium in Maine, the governor was hesitant to sign it. In fact, as of this morning, when we're recording this show, she has not yet signed it. And a lot of these proposed moratoriums have not passed across the state in a lot of communities. So a whole lot of debate on this. I should point out also really quickly, in Indiana, lawmakers did pass a law that's signed by the governor that data centers have to pay for at least 80% of the energy costs, and in some cases they've agreed to pay more. Yeah. Not a lot of action, though, other than that law in particular, right?
Yeah, there have been several bills that have been introduced to try and regulate data centers on everything from water use to electricity use, and none of them have moved forward. For the most part, they didn't even get hearings this past session. Some frustrated voters even held a people's hearing on data centers during the session because lawmakers wouldn't even look at the bills in committee. I will say, even then, none of the bills introduced in this most recent session would have put a moratorium on data centers, but would have added regulations that would likely have slowed down development.
On Wednesday, Politico published an article on how data center moratoriums are becoming a dividing line in light of Democratic primaries. Their photo cover, Indiana Congressman Andre Carson facing his own surprisingly intense primary challenge this year for Indiana District 7.
Yeah, over the past 2 weeks, I've sat down with each of the Democrats in that field to ask them about the race, including where they stand on data centers.
When it comes to the issue of data centers, all 4 candidates say they support moratoriums on more of them coming into communities.
I support the federal bill from Senator Bernie Sanders and AOC around a moratorium on data centers. And the reason I do that is because what we're seeing right now in data centers is the early innings of the larger AI debate that's to come. And the reality is we do not have the institutional capacity in Congress to govern this general purpose technology that is reshaping in real time civic, political, economic, in militaristic ways of life and doing things. And so I'm very concerned, as it comes to that.
What do you say to those who argue that data centers bring in investment and tax revenue?
I hear this argument a lot, and they do bring in some revenue. Here's the problem, is that when they come in, they have been directed to come in under one priority, and that is speed. What we're not seeing at the local level, because we're not equipped with it with our municipal elected officials, is that we are doing the negotiations on behalf of the community on the front end.
Where do you stand on data centers coming into Indiana communities?
It's shameful. It's shameful that our city council would do that. I'm saying, where are the leaders? The people on the ground, they are extremely upset. And you're talking about taxes. The data centers, sometimes it's debatable. They cause health issues. Who's going to pay that extra price? What do they do with the tax revenue? Is there job training? Women to be able to get Medicaid? Are they going to improve the school system? What are they actually going to do with that revenue? I don't see a plan. What's the plan?
It's called the AI Data Center Site Selection and Transparency Act. And it requires early disclosures to the public on all new data centers. And, it addresses those key impacts that we talk about: water consumption, cooling demands, environmental impacts. All violations of these things would be deemed illegal. So I support a moratorium on all construction in our district.
All right, so they pretty much all agreed, right?
Yeah, there's not a lot of daylight between these candidates on this issue and really on several issues, but that's not super surprising given that this is seen as such a safe Democratic district. Of course, the winner of that primary will not run unopposed.
That's right. Patrick McCulley and Dr. Felipe Rios are running in the Republican primary for the district. Libertarian Jim Siniak has already advanced from the Libertarian Party convention on March 22nd and will represent them on the ballot in November.
We'll hear more from the Democrats on the Iran conflict and the mounting pressure against incumbents across the nation coming up later in our show. You can also watch their full interviews on demand right here on WTHR+.
Marion County isn't the only place with an active Democratic Party.
Candidates are lining up for a shot at Congress in Hamilton County.
Traditionally, people looked at this as a red county. We're not anymore. We're as purple as it gets.
Still ahead, the crowded race to challenge Congresswoman Victoria Spartz in November.
And a campaign for retribution. Republicans pouring money into Indiana State Senate primaries to push opponents of redistricting.
But first, another state joins the national redistricting fight, the impact of Virginia voters redrawing their state's congressional maps. Next on Crossroads Politics.
Welcome back. One of the biggest political stories of the past year is still unfolding across the country. The president's push for mid-decade redistricting and the Democrat response.
That response now has put Republicans on the back foot after Virginia voters passed a new congressional map that could net Democrats 4 more seats. Combined with moves in California and a court order in Utah, it cancels out Republican successes in Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas.
Julie Carey has the latest.
The headline today is the legal fight is now on.
That's the assessment from former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli as he and other Republicans shift attention to court challenges that still threaten the future of the congressional redistricting map just approved by voters. The new map could net Democrats up to 4 seats as they push for control of the narrowly divided House. There are 4 cases before the courts, 2 in the Virginia Supreme Court, 1 in Richmond Circuit Court, and 1 in Tazewell County. In 3 of the cases, attorneys for Republican plaintiffs argue Democrats violated state law or the Constitution in the way they rushed the special election to the voters. One challenge says the gerrymandered map violates rules that say congressional districts should be composed of contiguous and compact territory. The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on Monday in one of the cases, but Congressman James Walkinshaw, who celebrated with Democrats last night, questions whether the court would upend the election results.
It would be shocking. I think it would be outrageous for the court at this juncture to overrule the voters. I think it would be a very poor decision for a court to overrule the voters. If they were going to make that decision, they needed to do that before the referendum took place.
But Cuccinelli says when the court put a pause on the challenge and ruled the referendum could move forward, it also had a warning.
The court made it very clear. They actually said, and this was very unusual, that we have significant concerns when they held the case in abeyance. To make any comment like that at all is very unusual.
Attorney General Jay Jones says his office is prepared to defend the special election process and the maps.
I am so proud of my team for stepping in and working tirelessly to make sure that this continues to move forward. And so we will take everything as it comes and continue to work diligently on behalf of the people of Virginia.
The GOP's leader in the Virginia House disappointed with the special election loss, but predicting a different outcome in the end when all the court challenges are decided.
We still lost, but we're going to win ultimately in the courts.
All right, so sounds like the fight in Virginia far from over. And of course, Indiana had its own redistricting fight, one that ended in a surprise defeat for President Trump, who promised retribution against the Republican senators who defeated the redistricting push here. And that is a promise he and his allies are holding to.
President Trump has endorsed conservative Michelle Davis for state senate.
From TV ads to text messages, there's no question election season is here.
Soft on China.
And for Indiana this year,
this is the first time that we would have spent it on the state legislative races.
A ton of money pouring in from out of state.
Pretty unusual, isn't it?
It's incredibly unusual.
Political experts call it payback, political retribution, targeting state lawmakers who voted against congressional redistricting late last year. The pressure campaign by the White House to lean on conservative states to redraw their district maps in an effort to pick up more Republican seats in Congress. Here, it didn't work, and the president and governor warned they'd target those Republicans who voted it down by supporting their challenger. So now,
President Trump decided it's time for new leadership in the Indiana Senate. And to get that, we need to elect a lot of these new younger members who are running for Senate, challenging some of the old guard. And the Club for Growth is there to help them win their race.
That's David McIntosh, president of the conservative Club for Growth. The group spent a record $1.5 million on ads in the May Republican primary. And they're not alone. More organized interest groups have jumped in too, along with those to help the incumbents. It's an expensive example of politics playing out in other states that have also debated congressional redistricting this year.
This is a lot more money from outside than we're used to seeing. And I think there's also just a lot more focus on these particular races because of how nationalized the conversation over redistricting was.
And Emily, neither of these fights is happening in a vacuum. Virginia Republicans frustrated that their party only spent an estimated $10 million fighting redistricting there in Virginia. That's according to Axios. According to Politico, national Republicans have spent the same amount, $10 million, on the Indiana Senate primary, again, targeting just 7 seats in the Indiana Senate.
And the Democratic spending is kind of flipped, right? Do I understand that?
That's right. So Democrats opened the floodgates on the Virginia redistricting push. Axios estimates $62 million was spent in support of the Virginia ballot measure. By comparison, Politico estimates Democrats have spent about $500,000 on Indiana state Senate races.
But that doesn't mean that Democrats aren't paying attention to those races, right?
No, not at all. In fact, Democrats are celebrating the fact that for the first time in more than a decade, no Republican is running unopposed for the Indiana Senate. That's for sure. There's a long way to go between just running and being competitive in all of those districts. But Democrats maintain that, look, this is a sign of growing discontent with the Republican supermajority.
And nationally, the redistricting fight is not over. Florida has an upcoming special session of its own to redraw its congressional maps, but there is a pall floating over that effort, the fear of a so-called dummy-mander.
That's right. So that's when a gerrymander backfires on the party in power. The way gerrymandering works in the party in power tries to draw districts to spread out their voters, and pack the other party's voters into a small number of districts. But the danger is that if there is a big wave election, if your voters are too spread out, the districts could flip to the other party.
And the whole reason for the redistricting push was to pad Republican numbers. Midterms are always hard for the party in power, Democrats or Republicans.
That's right. And right now the president has his lowest approval ratings of either term. So the worry is that if Florida Republicans stretch their majority too thinly, actually they may end up losing seats in November.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Our coverage of the primary races across the state continues.
Candidates trying to stand out in the race to represent Indianapolis in Congress.
People are excited to see that they have choices.
Bringing back results to the district in the form of $1 billion.
I want to join the fight for people, regular people.
I'm not the rebel from outside throwing rocks in. I'm from inside the house saying that it's on fire.
Still ahead, each candidate argues their case to end up on the ballot in November.
That illegal aliens must never receive a CDL.
Big changes to how the goods you buy get to the store. Coming up, the crackdown on immigration comes to Indiana's roads.
This is by far the most competitive primary we've ever had.
And early voting is surging in Indiana District 5. The clamor to face Congresswoman Victoria Spartz in November. Next, here on Crossroads Politics.
Welcome back. Indianapolis isn't the only place where Democrats are lining up for a shot at Congress.
Indiana's 5th district has the eyes of the nation. That district, which runs from the northern edge of Marion County up to Kokomo, has been kind of drifting to the left for years.
It has. Even so, a Democrat hasn't won Indiana's 5th since 1990. But 7 candidates are now hoping to change that in the fall.
Jenna Webster takes a look at why some see this as the one chance Indiana Democrats have to flip a seat in the House.
Here to vote?
Early voting in a primary midterm election
Sign your name at the bottom.
tends to be a trickle of voters rather than a rush to the polls. But in Hamilton County,
What, another 78 today? What would you say?
voter turnout so far is more than triple the turnout at this point in the 2022 midterm primary.
There you go, sir. Thank you.
One look outside the County Justice Center will tell you there's a lot of races and candidates to choose from.
Well, I'm 85 and I've voted in every one of them since I was 21.
We asked voters like Alan Hurley
Haven't missed a one.
the issues most important to them this election.
There's a lot of nonsense going on in the world and need somebody that's a straight shooter.
Issues like early childhood education funding and healthcare were popular answers.
I'd like to restore the funding for U.S. Agency for International Development. I'd like to restore the funding for State Department overseas programs.
I think the number one thing is just someone that appears to actually care what Hoosiers think.
Josh Lowry is the Hamilton County Democratic Party chair.
This is by far the most competitive primary we've ever had.
Hamilton County is part of the 5th Congressional District, which stretches north to Kokomo and Marion and east to Muncie. It's got a crowded primary. Voters have 7 Democrats to choose from, including State Senator J.D. Ford and Deborah Pickett, who won the nomination in 2024. The primaries in both 2024 and 2022 only featured 2 Democrats.
And the fact that you have so many candidates and also a range of candidates speaks to the enthusiasm that the Democrats have right now and the real opportunity they see in this particular race to try to flip what is one of 7 Republican congressional seats in Indiana.
Everybody's going to have differences of opinions on different issues, and I think that makes all the candidates have to address them. And it just makes everybody step their game up, honestly.
The winner will likely face Republican incumbent Victoria Spartz in November, who won her last 2 elections by 20%. The Cook Political Report marks 7 of our congressional races as a solid Republican win, but the 5th leans less Republican than others by 8 points. That's down from our last 2 elections when the nonpartisan agency estimated it leaned Republican by 11.
Victoria Spartz is somewhat of a controversial incumbent Republican. Some of her constituents have been upset she hadn't served on committees recently, which is one of the ways that you represent your district. And there have also been times where she has gone against the president, but then changed her mind and ultimately supported the president.
Political science professor Laura Merrifield Wilson says in a midterm congressional election,
Select your party.
the party in power fares poorly.
In the 5th Congressional District, typically has high socioeconomic status, tend to be more educated and informed voters, so they'll be much more responsive to the sensitivities of the political dynamics.
What could shape a more competitive fall race in the 5th.
And then we're going to need you to sign at the bottom.
Could also come down to voters in Hamilton County. It's shifted 28 points to the left since 2012, one of the most in the country.
Traditionally, people looked at this as a red county. We're not anymore. We're as purple as it gets. 46 to 47% of the vote last time was Democrat, and I believe this year it's going to be over 50%.
But first, Democrats have to narrow the field to one.
Thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. And that young lady will get you to a booth.
In Hamilton County, Jenna Webster, 13 News.
So another very crowded Democratic field in this race.
Right, and we should be clear, Congresswoman Spartz has a challenger within her own party. Scott King is running against her in the Republican primary.
Yeah, and she had a crowded field last time around.
Yeah,
in
she
2024, she faced 8 challengers, narrowly beat Chuck Goodrich 39% to 33.
And the margins of victory in the general election have been tightening up too. In 2022, Spartz beat Jeanine Lee Lake by 23 points. In 2024, she beat Deborah Pickett by 18 points. As Jenna reported, Cook Political Report is giving her an 8-point edge right now, and that's without a set Democratic opponent.
And we checked with the Federal Election Commission, and at the end of March, Victoria Spartz had just over $66,000 cash on hand. J.D. Ford, the top fundraising Democrat in the race, had more than twice that much, $142,000 cash on hand. Obviously still a long way to go to November, but definitely a race the nation will be watching.
Yeah, they are watching. This week, Governor Mike Braun held a ceremonial signing for a bill that could reshape part of Indiana's trucking workforce. It includes stricter rules for truck drivers who are trying to get something called a non-domiciled CDL.
That's a commercial driver's license issued to somebody not born in the U.S. but who is here legally. Some industry groups and immigration advocates are warning the changes could make it harder to fill critical driving jobs.
Right. The governor and some state leaders say the new law is about safety and accountability. Monday was actually a ceremonial signing. The law, HEA 1200, already went into effect on April 1st, and already changes are happening because of it.
House Enrolled Act number 1200, Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
Governor Braun praised some of those changes Monday, surrounded by lawmakers and representatives from the trucking industry that supported them.
That illegal aliens must never receive a CDL. Indiana is taking decisive action to make sure this never happens.
One of the biggest changes, CDL exams are effectively now English only, with drivers required to show a sufficient ability to read, speak, and understand English. This aligns Indiana more strictly with federal rule changes about which immigrants can get a non-domiciled CDL. The law also creates serious consequences for fraud or using improper documentation to get one.
It enables the state to remove CDLs from illegal aliens, and it creates new penalties to crack down on non-licensed drivers and the companies that employ them.
The new Indiana law comes after a rule change from the federal government last fall that limited which immigrants are allowed to get non-domiciled CDLs. After that rule change, federal regulators notified 24 states, including Indiana, they were issuing non-domiciled CDLs incorrectly. According to a BMV spokesperson, they have stopped issuing the licenses for now, but will start again soon. Since April 1st, the state has revoked the licenses of close to 1,800 non-domiciled drivers, bringing the number of drivers who hold one currently into the single digits. Some immigrant rights advocates have warned the law could lead to discrimination and profiling of foreign-born drivers. Some workforce advocates have raised concerns about reducing the driver pool, leading to disruptions in supply chains. Supporters of the law in the trucking industry disagree, calling driver shortage concerns a myth.
Each and every year, over 400,000 new people become licensed to be truck drivers. Over 400,000. And that is, I mean, that's an astronomical number of people that would like to be in this industry.
The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association says it's about safety.
It's a more critical safety issue to commercial truck drivers than anyone else because they spend the majority of their time on those roads, and we want it safe for everyone.
And while there are examples of immigrant drivers causing fatal crashes, at this point there are no hard statistics showing immigrant drivers are more dangerous on the roads than U.S. citizens. The federal government confirms they do not track safety statistics by immigration status or type of commercial license. Some in the trucking industry say that needs to change.
So how big of an impact is this?
Nationwide, it's huge. In 2022, the American Trucking Association estimated the country was short almost 79,000 truckers. That was a big part of the supply chain issues you recall from the COVID pandemic. And in 2025, the logistics company Wayfinder reported the shortage had not gotten any better.
Well, and a trucker shortage, it's a big deal, right? Something like 71% of all the goods in the country are transported by trucks at some point before they get to us.
Right. So the Biden administration eased up on visa requirements for foreign-born truck drivers, making it easier for them to get to the U.S. and drive. That was a policy President Trump reversed last year, leading to the changes made by Indiana lawmakers this past session. I will say, as you saw in that story, I also spoke with the head of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. That's a trade organization for small businesses and professional truck drivers. The organization supports this change, and the head of it, Todd Spencer, as you see there, called the idea of a driver shortage a myth, saying that every year over 400,000 new people become licensed truck drivers. So.
All right. Our coverage of the race to represent Indianapolis in Congress is far from over,
including their takes on one of the biggest issues facing the nation today, the conflict in Iran.
I think that this war has been disastrous.
Get the hell out. Why are we there?
You don't fight just because Donald Trump decides.
You owe it to them to show up and force the hard conversations.
Coming up, what they say Congress should do as talks for peace continue.
The purpose of the bill is not criminal action, but moving homeless Hoosiers toward social service networks to help them get needed services and stay safe.
But critics say a new law the governor signed would send people to jail for essentially being homeless. What it changes next here on Crossroads Politics.
Welcome back. This week, Governor Braun held a ceremonial signing for a controversial bill dealing with homelessness.
Starting July 1st, it would make it illegal for a homeless person to sleep on public land.
Supporters of the new law say it's meant to help those dealing with homelessness and also keep public spaces safe. Critics of the new law argue it criminalizes being homeless without addressing the root causes.
It's time to do more than what we've done.
And when it comes to addressing the issue of homelessness, Governor Mike Braun and supporters of Senate Enrolled Act 285, including its author, think this new law is the approach Indiana should take.
We have to do something that is going to make an impact. And while there have been many great organizations who have had many great initiatives, the reality is that the population of unsheltered homelessness continues to grow.
The new law makes it illegal to camp or sleep on public property. Those who do and refuse to move could face 60 days in jail or fines up to $500. But a person who's unhoused can't be convicted of breaking the law if there are no shelter beds available within 5 miles.
There is not space in shelter. All of our programs are nearly full.
Emmy Hildebrandt with Helping Veterans and Families of Indiana testified against the bill during session. She says right now there are 34 homeless veterans in Marion County.
We're talking about men and women who volunteered to serve our country.
Hildebrandt believes the resources it will take to enact the law would be better used somewhere else.
Additional jail space, court staff to process them through the system. I think those investments would be better made in housing.
The law also changes how police must respond when dealing with someone who's unhoused. Officers must first determine if a person needs help for a mental health emergency, rather than arresting them first. Police also must collect data on the number of arrests they make enforcing the new law.
How many beds are there? What is the need statewide? The data that we need is part of what I'm starting to work on for the next legislative session.
A session that will include a new 2-year budget and how state funding gets spent, and how much of that will go towards addressing unhoused Hoosiers.
Are those dollars actually having an impact on the areas that we need?
For those who work directly with the unhoused like HVAF.
I'm hopeful that in this upcoming session we'll be able to collaborate.
Now, Governor Braun said the point was not criminal action, but getting the unhoused in touch with social services.
Okay, so police are going to have to enforce this law. So what are they saying about it?
Well, many departments are still working on it, sorting it all out. I reached out to IMPD and they sent me a statement. It read in part, quote, "Our homeless outreach unit alongside our community partners will continue its longstanding work providing services and support to individuals experiencing homelessness. We understand that an arrest is not always the appropriate response to the complex issues surrounding homelessness, but IMPD PD will take law enforcement action when crimes are committed. Now, before this law, officers could call for mental health help for the homeless. Now they must do an assessment. That's part of the law.
Well, we heard from critics in that story. We've heard from them all along the way. What are they saying now that this is going into effect in July?
Well, one of the things they said before it passed is that there's not enough places for our unhoused folks to go. They say the state just does not have enough beds and shelters for all the people currently living on the streets.
And what did the bill's authors say about that?
Well, Republican State Senator Cindy Carrasco said that's something to look at next session, which will be when lawmakers figure out the next budget. She called this law passed this session a first step.
Okay, we'll continue to follow it. Our look at the Democratic primary for Indiana Congressional District 7 here in Indianapolis is far from over.
While the candidates agree on many issues, they have different takes on why they think voter turnout has been low in Marion County.
We are now the worst district in the state in voter turnout.
That's by design, and we are falling for it.
You need to be there. You need to be present.
Indiana has some of the worst voter access laws in the country.
Coming up, they make their case to voters and explain their positions on the Iran conflict.
Welcome back to Crossroads Politics. We're glad you're with us.
We're continuing to track the latest developments in the conflict in Iran following President Donald Trump's extension of the ceasefire amid rising tensions. Here's the latest.
The United States is just...
President Trump standing firm that time is on his side in the war with Iran.
We have plenty of time, and I want to get a great deal.
Counting on economic pressure from the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports to force Iran to negotiate, though the regime says that's a key obstacle to a deal. The president announced he's ordered the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any boat that's putting mines in the Strait of Hormuz.
We will shoot to destroy. No hesitation, just like the drug boats in the Caribbean.
The president saying the U.S. has total control over the strait, despite Iranian attacks on 3 commercial ships that the regime claims is shown in this highly produced video, and President Trump downplayed.
Their military is totally defeated. They're outside of the little wise guy ships. I call them the wise guy ships, the little boats that they have running around with guns in them.
Still, the president acknowledged the turmoil may keep gas prices higher here at home.
For a little while. And you know what they get for that? You know what they get for that? Iran without a nuclear weapon.
Pressing the case for his strategy as polls show Americans increasingly frustrated with the war's costs and pointing to victories in degrading Iran's military and taking out senior leaders.
They don't even know who's leading the country. They're in turmoil.
Despite those successes, new NBC News reporting finds Iran's regime may have benefited politically from the attacks started by the U.S. and Israel. That's according to a Western diplomat with knowledge of the conflict and 5 Western officials with knowledge of intelligence assessments on Iran. 5 of the officials said the regime is more stable and slightly more hardline now than before the war. President Trump announced a 3-week extension of Israel's ceasefire with Lebanon, negotiated here in Washington. It's between the two governments. And President Trump said the U.S. would be working with Lebanon to help it protect itself from the Iran-backed Hezbollah militants, who are the ones Israel has actually been fighting with inside of Lebanon. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
And the conflict and its impact on the economy, it's having a big effect. They're hanging heavy over the 2026 election. The conflict remains deeply unpopular nationwide. Gas prices remain about $1 higher than they were before the conflict started.
I asked the Indiana Democrats running to represent District 7 in Congress where they stood on the Iran conflict and what Congress should do about it.
When it comes to the ongoing conflict in Iran, there's no daylight between the 4 candidates running in the 7th Congressional District's Democratic primary. George Tornado says the U.S. shouldn't be there and doesn't think the U.S.'s objectives are clear.
We've got all these folks here at home that are hurting, here in Indianapolis that are hurting, yet the president is concerned about Iran and everything else on in the world. That doesn't sound very America first to me. And so it's deeply frustrating to see this, especially when the reality is all of this is just a distraction from the Epstein files.
Destiny Wells is a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve and could face a deployment if the conflict in Iran expands. She says the U.S. entered the conflict with no strategy.
This really does keep me up at night. I'm a mother. And the thought of having to leave my children for the whims of Donald Trump because a Congress sat silent, I think is so much of the reason why I'm running.
What decisions should Congress be taking back right now from the executive branch?
They should be calling it in for hearings. They should be putting the Department of Defense, not War, and calling them out on the carpet. And I think that they are largely avoiding this politically.
Former Center Township Constable Denise Paul Hatch says the president should not have made the decision to attack Iran without consulting Congress, but doesn't believe the U.S. should be involved in the first place.
I pray for world peace every day. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, I'm a Buddhist. I pray for world peace. But I have a 25-year-old. He can be called up to fight for what? You fight for America. You don't fight just because Donald Trump decides, he want to play games with the Israelis.
Since the conflict in Iran began at the end of February, incumbent Congressman Andre Carson has voted repeatedly for the War Powers Resolution, backing efforts to restrict or end U.S. military involvement in Iran without congressional approval.
President Trump has yet to come before Congress to make the case that it is our constitutional duty and obligation to enact wars, with the exception of very exigent circumstances. And President Trump has failed to do so. I think that this war has been disastrous. It has caused economic instability, not just here, but in the region. Gas prices have skyrocketed. We're still dealing with rising food costs. And, Trump's leadership has effectively been disastrous.
So, Emily, as you listen to these candidates and how they feel and where they are on the big issues, they really do agree, but that's not why they're running.
No, each made their case for why they should represent Indianapolis in Congress. Take a listen.
Look, I'm running because I'm unafraid.
There is a sense of urgency.
There's a gap in leadership.
It's about serving the people.
Why they're running and why they say you should vote for them. Next on Crossroads Politics.
Welcome back. Across American politics, we are seeing a surge in anger at incumbents of both parties.
We've already discussed the divisive Republican primaries in the wake of redistricting and taken a look at how the Democratic candidates for Indiana's 7th district have similar takes on some big issues.
But 3 of them are mounting a fierce challenge to incumbent Congressman Andre Carson, who's represented Indianapolis for about 18 years, and each of them made their case for why they should replace him.
Destiny Wells is one of them. Many voters may recognize her name from her runs for Indiana Attorney General and Secretary of State, both races of which she lost. But she said those struggles are part of what is motivating her.
Yeah, I think there is complacency. I think we've hollowed out the party, and so we have the people who are at the table who are comfortable, but that doesn't mean that voters are comfortable. And in Indianapolis specifically, I like to remind people who drew the district for this congressional district. Republicans drew this district. They gerrymandered it so that they could pack in as many Democrats as they could into one space, and that has caused complacency. That's by design, and we are falling for it. I've ran alongside the congressman twice now. I respect his service to the party, but it's been 18 years, and I think people around Indianapolis are asking why they have not seen results. And we need to be giving them choices, and we're seeing it out in the field. People are excited to see that they have choices. They weren't even showing up. We only had 1 out of 10 registered voters that have showed up in our primaries for the last 2 cycles. That does not create great democracy.
Wells has already run in 2 statewide races, but 2 of the challengers may be new, even to those who pay attention to politics.
Right, but both have some experience in that world. For example, George Hornato hasn't run for statewide office, but touts his experience working in the Obama administration. His case is focused on politics and rebuilding the Democratic Party.
Look, I'm running because I'm unafraid, and somebody has to do it. As much as I like and respect Congressman Carson personally, we have to tell the truth that he's not a very good congressman. He is ranked consistently in the bottom 10% in legislative effectiveness for all his peers. We lag behind peer cities across the country in how much federal funds, that we're able to bring home. This district under his grandmother was the best in the state in voter turnout, and that's when Democrats were competing, even winning statewide. Under the congressman, we are now the worst district in the state in voter turnout. And so I think my background, lends itself well to being able to approach some of these challenges that we face that are more systemic and structural. You know, for one, I've represented cities all over the country, from Birmingham to Jackson to Little Rock to Miami-Dade County, and also the African American Mayors Association. So I know how to kind of maneuver, you know, the levers of power and being able to make sure that we bring more resources home. You know, and two, my background working in national democratic politics, you know, in the Obama administration as a presidential appointee at the Justice Department doing civil rights work on a whole host of presidential campaigns. I've got both the vision and the ability to execute and put the pieces of the puzzle together so that, while not overnight, we can hopefully compete again. And it starts here in Indy with refueling things. And I think we're actually seeing a great example right now. Early voting just started last week. So far, at this stage in early voting, there are 2.29 times as many votes as in recent cycles.
And Hornados spent a lot of time talking about organizing and building the Democratic Party, both here in Marion County, but also in the whole state.
And another candidate for the seat is former Center Township Constable Denise Paul Hatch.
Right. She and I sat down and discussed why she was throwing her hat in the ring, and she focused immediately on the issue of utility costs.
I'm seeing there's a gap in leadership. What happened with AES was actually unforgivable. It's actually criminal what happened. You had people, for instance, a man came up to me while I was campaigning down at a city county building, and he says, you know what, I am now living at a friend's house because my light bill, my utility is off, my electricity is still off. He said he has a medical problem, but he was just at the threshold to get approved for it, but they cut his lights off. So because of his health, he actually had to go live with a friend. Believe it or not, I opened up my bill at a house that we are renovating, $15,000. That's the truth. And so I said, who's investigating? Where are leaders? Who's protecting the consumer? Who's protecting the voters here? Nobody. So I said, okay, I'm used to fighting for, so I'm going to join the fight. That's what I want to join the fight for people, regular people.
Hatch also spoke about her Buddhist faith and her experience as an immigrant in our conversation.
All right, so they're all vying to unseat incumbent Congressman Andre Carson. So what does Congressman Carson make of these challenges?
Okay, so he questioned the motives of his opposition, and he didn't hesitate to defend his record.
This is a democracy, and there are different motivations for it. You know, some want to get their name ID up to run for something else. Others see it as a means of enriching themselves and bolstering their consultant firms. But, you know, for me, it's about serving the people. I'm someone who has brought back over $1 billion to Indianapolis for projects like Indigo, the Cultural Trail, investing in organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, Fathers and Family, Overdose Lifeline. I helped to pass the largest investment in infrastructure in nearly a century, which helped with our rail, sidewalks, water, broadband access, and even roads. I'm currently in a leadership position on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I'm the ranking member, God willing, soon to be chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. I haven't been afraid to take on Donald Trump. And, you know, I was critically responsible for helping to cap insulin at $35 a month, even when pharmaceutical executives across the country were very upset with me.
So Carson, they're proud of his record. He also spoke about being raised by his grandmother, who represented Indianapolis before him, along with the cost of utilities and campaign contributions.
And you can watch that full conversation along with Emily's interviews with the other Democrats running for District 7. Right now, you can find it anytime you want to watch it on demand here on WTHR+.
And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. I'm Emily Longnecker.
And I'm Dustin Grove. For all of us here at 13 News, thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you next time.